In our last lesson, we finished off by putting in our 1, 6, 11, and then our 2 and our 10. Today, we're going to finish the rest of the scale. All right, let's go. So just to be clear, I do use an 11-step value scale, but I realize that talking about the 9-step in relation to this is a little confusing. So from that point of view, what I'll do is I'll just cover up the numbers below, because what I do is I use the 11-step all the time. But from the point of view of making a scale, it's not as nice because, you see, if we have a 9-step value scale, we can mix a 7 and have a 6 and 8 on either side in between these two. And we can have a 3 with a 2 and a 4 on either side. So it's just one step in between each of these things we're mixing. And all we have to do is have and have again. So that's kind of nice. That's really straightforward. And from that point of view, again, what I like about the 9 steps is that, and the way that I'm using it, is we don't use the lightest light or the darkest dark, because that is reserved for like the final touch, the just perfect little mark at the end, right? That absolute highlight and that absolute darkest dark. Because most of the painting is somewhere in the middle. So it just makes it easier to make the scale, but afterwards I will only refer to the 11-step value scale. So let's mix up our 7 and our 3. As a general principle, I like to work dark to light. On paper, because the ground itself is white, meaning the paper, it kind of makes sense to work from light to dark. You see, this board here is a mid-tone board. It's approximately a 5, 5.5, or 6, somewhere in there. And this is what I typically will paint on. And often, even for drawings, I like drawing on gray paper with white charcoal and black charcoal. With a white paper, as a process, it does make more sense to work light to dark. Either way, you're good. As long as you work systematically, you should be fine. Okay, let's go for the 7. Now I'm going to start again with the HB. And just so that I get that first pass on the white paper pretty even and consistent. Right, I then will switch to my 2B so that I can build up a bit quicker. Okay. Now we do our second pass. You see, it's already so much darker just because the graphite is much softer. Okay, there's our second pass. We keep building it up. All right, being super mindful as we do it that we're keeping that pattern nice and consistent. especially around the edges. Okay, do a third pass. Again, let's really take our time on this. Like I was saying in the last lesson, we shouldn't be surprised if it takes us 3 to 4 hours to make this scale. Because just getting them in is the first step. Then we need to look at it as a progression to make sure that those steps feel very regular. And then we need to troubleshoot if any issues are there. Okay, we've done 2 more passes. Let's take another look. So we take a look at this. We ask ourselves, is it leaning more towards the 5 or the 9? And then if I look above to compare it to the reference, feels pretty good. Now I'm almost certain that when we fill in the 6 and the 8, we'll have some adjusting to do. But at least at this point, we can leave it as it is, right? And we'll move on. We'll move on to our 3. And for the 3, I'm going to go to my HB. There we go. Just take it down a bit. Now I end up with some blotches, but at this point, we know how to deal with that. Not a big deal. We just fill it in very carefully. Okay, let's take a look at that. Well, that helps solidify this one, right? This one's also looking a little better. The steps are beginning to feel a little more equal. Now all we have to do is put the value in between, and then we'll take a look at the whole group. We'll start with the 8, and I'll move on to my 2B. One of the things we want to make sure we do is keep good divisions between each one of these. So I'll use a slightly darker line like we have in the reference. Okay, now I'm looking at that 8, taking a look either side, asking myself if that looks right. You see, this is where we start to notice inconsistencies in texture and pattern across them all. So we're a little too light on this left edge in number 9. Let me take a look again. Now this is looking better. That looks pretty good. This one, a little bit light on the bottom, a little blotchy on top and middle, a little light on the edge in here, a little blotchy at the top. So easiest thing to do, let's get rid of some of those dark blotches. So some of those dark spots are a bit more resistant to being picked up, but the kneaded eraser is perfect for this, right? As long as you stretch it and reform it, you always get a nice clean part to work from. You can sharpen it to a point, and it's a precision eraser in that sense. And then we also have the Tombow, which is already a fine point. It's also a lot harder if you have a particularly stubborn spot. You might just have to really have a go at it, right? And then we can go back in and even it up again. As I darken 8, I'm noticing again a little bit of the lightness on the edge of 7. Now 8's beginning to look better. If I compare it to the reference, it's looking better. It still does seem to group a little too much with the 7. Well, it does in the lower half. The upper half seems to be more where it wants to be in relation to 7 and 8. So looks like the lower half is just a little light still. Okay, we move on to our 6. I'm going to start with a 2B. Begin to lay it in. Okay, now we have 3, well, through 10, but 3 through 9 all in. And taking a look at them, you know, it's interesting again, 4 and 5 still look too similar, but so does 6, right? All 3 of them are kind of grouping together. We're not really seeing this progression or this step up as we do when we look at the reference. So 7 itself also looks a little light by comparison to the 7 above. But if we look at this progression down, you know, even 9 and 8 look a little light as we step down, right? The steps feel more balanced and even as we move across. And here it's a bit of a jump from dark, our darkest dark, to here. So each one of these could just be a little bit darker. Now we're almost at the point where we have our 2 and then we see the whole scale. So maybe we'll just wait to do this part until we just push this one in. Okay, so looking at the absolute light, my 1 and my 2, that looks pretty good so far, right? Those steps read pretty well. 3, still looking too light. And again, the progression sort of reads, but it's very light, then we get some mid-tone, and then it ramps right up to black. So we need some of this dark to travel down a little bit more. And we need that 3 to just go a little step darker. You know, I get the sense that that 3 really wants to be similar to the 4, or just slightly lighter, and that 4 needs to be just a hair darker, and then still a little bit more on 5. So this is the part where we need to start working on the strip, the value scale as a whole. Okay, so white, 1, 2, 3. Those steps look pretty decent so far. 4, still too light. 5, too light. 6, too light. So let's do a pass over those with increasing, maybe a second pass on this, 3 passes on this one, maybe 4 on this one. But still using the HB so that we don't go too dark. Right, now that starts to feel a little better as a jump, but again, that 4 needs to also come up. Okay, nice. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That looks pretty good. 5 needs a little darker. 6, 7, all 3, right? They all want another pass. So the 6 is looking good. We have a couple little blotches here. It does give me a little bit more space to just lightly darken the 5. At this point, you can really begin to understand what I mean about this exercise taking a few hours. It's a lot more subtle than it looks. Okay, now taking a look. 0, 1, 2, looks good. 3, those are looking good. 4, still looking decent. Maybe getting a little bit light on the right side. 5, mostly okay, a little blotchy. 6, good. But 4 and 5, still too close to each other. 3, 4, possibly too close. All right, we really need those steps to be very distinct from one to the next to the next. So rather than troubleshooting this at this point, let's still just finish the first correction by moving down, and then we'll do that refinement. We might have to do 2 levels of refinement, and then we should be pretty good. Right, when you lean back, you get a much more objective view of the scale. Begin to see what needs work. So 5 to 6 is beginning to look better. 7 as well does look better. Looks like it could still, like if we refer to the reference, but also to either side, not enough movement between these 3, right? Much more noticeable between 4, 5, and 6. There's a clear step between them. 6, 7, 8, too similar. But 6 is good compared to 5. 7 is too similar to 6. 7 gets darker. 8 will be darker still. Okay. Okay, right now 7. Definite difference from 6. Definite step. It does make me aware that 6 could also maybe just a hair darker. Just one slight pass again. Very faint pass. And usually, if it's a faint thing, usually that means that it's a little inconsistent. Because, certain parts look good compared to this, certain parts don't. You see the upper half is grouping more with 7, the lower half more with 5. So usually that means we need to just even up the rectangle and that rather than darkening it. Okay, it's looking a little better. 5 is a little rough, a little bit lighter bit on the edge like we saw earlier. Just take that down a hair, a little bit light here. Okay, the contrasts are getting better. Let's finish these two off and then we'll assess the whole thing again. Okay, so we have our values in. Now let's take a little look at these just to make sure we're happy with where we've ended up. Now it does look like these two are not bad. Right, we need this contrast to be on both sides. We can't have them grouping together in pairs. And if they're doing that, it means that the contrast on one side is not the same as on the other. Right? We have to have that same contrast on both sides. So we assess, we stand back. Now, what I notice is that these three are too similar. We start to see a distinct difference between these two. Even our 7 is not bad. I think if we even up just a little bit of the light we're seeing in here, it might group together a little more solidly and look like a contrast against the 6. Now, if you're up close, you're just not going to see the effect of this black and white TV pattern. You're not going to see it from a distance. You see it up close and it just it looks fine. You have to step back, squint, take a look. Right, so now at this point, the value scale is in place and hey, listen. I know that, my voice is soft and these lessons are long, but the least you could do is stay awake, okay? Okay, is that too much to ask? Thank you. Okay, so surveying the scale, just noticing that our 5 is a little light on the bottom. Our 4 looks a little too light, just in general, but especially on the lower half. Now, what else do we see? Well, I wonder if our 9 could be a tiny bit darker. just have a little more of a step from the 8. And it probably doesn't need to be darker everywhere. Let's just see what I can do to even up some of this texture. Maybe our 5 could also be just the tiniest bit darker. Okay, I think that's pretty good. At this point we can remove the pieces. Okay, so to sum this up, we can either work with an 11 value scale or a 9. We can use the 9 if we just simply do not use the absolute light and the absolute dark. And then in either case it will work well. And right, we built up our scale with very even, light, consistent pressure so that the value came up completely level. Inevitably there's some bit of texture that we see that we carefully even out to get a uniform pattern across all of our values. With all of our values in place, we then did a scan just to see that the flow between them all worked well. And we have a value scale, which will serve us very well as we're beginning to develop our still life. So where do we go from here? In the next lesson, we create a gradient scale where there are no divisions between each of the values and we get a perfect smooth transition, a perfect gradient. If you're enjoying these videos, please subscribe. It really does help, and you just give me some feedback that, you know, these things are worth doing. Also, feel free to leave me comments or any questions you have about any part of this process in the comment section below. And I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.